What's up everybody, I'm Jason, and welcome back to some more tips and tricks for the Canon EOS R5. So in the last several videos, I have been talking about recording video on the R5, some of the functions, features, and how that works. And if you ask me, at least 50% of what makes video interesting or video is the audio that goes with it. And like most cameras that can do video recording, the EOS R5 also has the capability of recording audio. Now, I should note before I get started with this video that everything that I'm going to be talking about, or almost everything I'm going to be talking about in this video, you can find on pretty much any of Canon's other cameras that do video recording. So the organization in some places may be a little bit different, but the same set of settings is pretty much going to be everywhere on those cameras. So in this video, I'm going to be covering both the inputs, so the microphones, how to get audio into the camera, and the menu settings that you can use to control the audio on the camera. I was going to talk about the performance of the camera when it came to recording audio. However, I decided that given the length of the video and the amount of information I have to cover in general, that would be separated out into a second video. So that will be what I'll talk about in the next video, is a pretty lightweight look given the complete range of what you can do with audio testing on how the camera's audio system performs from a recording quality perspective. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the first part of this video and start talking about the ways to get sound into the camera. So there are two ways you can get audio into the camera. One is through the built-in mic. So if you're wondering where it is, it's located just in front of the top LCD on the front side of the camera, between the grip and the viewfinder hump, next to the autofocus assist LED. It's a single small hole basically molded into the plastic. Obviously, that means you can pretty much guess from that this is not going to be a professional quality microphone. This is not going to give you amazing sound quality and amazing capabilities. And you could also probably guess that since there's only one here, it's mono only. Further, due to its location on the camera and the fact that it's built into the camera, subject to picking up a lot of noise that external microphones just might not pick up. So it will pick up autofocus motor noise, it will pick up in-lens image stabilizer noise. How big of an issue this would be is going to depend to a large extent on the lens that you're using. So older lenses are going to be more noisy than more newer lenses, but it's going to pick that up. It's really sensitive to the button and dial clicks that the camera makes. So any type of control input that makes any kind of sound whatsoever, that just reverberates through the camera's chassis and the microphone picks it up. So what is this good for? Well, okay, obviously if it's the only microphone you have, it's the only microphone you have. That said, it's really only going to be useful at, say, vlogging distances of like arm's length or away from you. Anything further than that in a noisy environment, and it's pretty much not going to do an awful lot for you. The only use that I really see for this, and quite honestly, this is what I use this microphone for all the time. So dirty secret maybe is that while everybody will tell you never to use the internal microphone is the microphone that my R5 and R5C are set to and use 99% of the time. Now, how can I get away with that and still have good audio? Well, the answer is I do two-system audio. So I have a decent quality mic above my head on a boom, and I have a decent audio recorder in the form of a Zoom F6 that's doing the actual recording, and then I sync everything together in post. Unfortunately, due to the situation with time codes in consumer level cameras and the mess that is, the best way to go about doing that then is using the audio waveform synchronization that you can find in programs like Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve. So that's what I use. To do that though, you do need a scratch audio track on the camera, and the built-in mic is perfectly fine for that, as long as you're in a reasonably quiet environment and you're not tremendously far away from the camera. So 8 to 10 feet in a quiet office or bedroom or something like that, doing this kind of thing that I'm doing now, or in case of an interview in a quiet space, the built-in mic will give you a perfectly adequate scratch audio track that you can use to sync up your normal audio after the fact. Now, If you are going to record audio on the camera, the best thing that you can do for yourself is get an external mic. Unfortunately, the R5 doesn't support Canon's fancy new multi-function shoe with its built-in audio inputs and all of that, but it does provide a 3.5mm or 1/8" headphone-style jack that provides audio input. So this is located, if you go to the port side of the camera and you look on the front column of ports at the very top, you'll find this connection. Now, this is a consumer-grade audio input. It is not XLR, even though that you can have an XLR balanced connection over a 3-pin tip ring shield style jack, but this is not that. This is a very simple stereo consumer-level audio in. It does provide plug-in power, so it can work with a lot of consumer-level lav mics that do require this kind of power to function, but otherwise, this is nothing fancy. Now, I should note, if you're not familiar with the whole power situation on microphones, there are basically two standards for this. There is plug-in power, which is a consumer-level standard used by consumer-grade microphones, and there is phantom power. Phantom power is what XLR microphones and professional microphones use. So they're not compatible. They're completely different in how they work. This is the consumer level one, not the professional level one. So those are the ways to get the audio into the camera. Let's talk about the settings in the camera that control things. So there are literally only 5 settings on the EOS R5 that have anything to do with audio. Some of the newer cameras, like the R6 Mark II, add a 6th setting for noise reduction, which I will not be covering, as I said, because I don't have one of those cameras. So this is only going to be the 5 basic and most common audio settings available. So the first place to look for your audio settings and where you'll find 4 of the 5 settings is on the Shoot One menu under the Sound Recording submenu. There you'll find 2 settings plus a submenu that takes you to 2 more settings. So the settings here you're going to see are the sound rec setting, the rec level setting, and then the submenu that gives you control over the wind filter and attenuator. So we'll start at the top with the sound rec setting. Basically, this is your master arm or master control for audio recording on the R5. You have 3 options to choose from the setting, starting with disabled, which is going to turn off the audio subsystem completely. Now, when it turns off the audio subsystem, the camera will not record audio data. Obviously, it doesn't process or sample audio data, but it also will not include an audio stream in your files. So any kind of video file like the MP4s that these cameras produce have multiple streams in them. One will be video, one will be audio, one could be time codes, one could be metadata, and so on and so forth. If you disable the sound recording on the camera, your file will only contain a video stream, a time code stream, and the metadata information. The second option that you have in this menu is manual. And this is where most people who are doing any kind of, or trying to do any kind of serious audio recording on the R5 are going to want to be. So in manual, you have control directly over the level that the camera is going to be recorded at. So the gain, the fader, however you want to consider it with the camera. This means that you can pick a level where you have a appropriate balance for your scene, and if somebody's quiet or speaks softly, that will be quiet, and if somebody yells, that will be loud. So this will preserve the dynamics in the recording that you are in the environment or of the recording that you are making. The final option in this menu is auto, and this is your auto level, auto gain control, whatever you wish to call it, of your recording system. So in this mode, the camera will automatically attempt to adjust the level of the audio input so that you get a consistent level in your file. Unfortunately, what this also means is that anything that sometimes somebody's talking softly, that will be amplified up. If there's a quiet section where there's no dialogue or no real sound to be recorded, the camera will push the amplification all the way up essentially as high as it can go, and with that you'll get an audible, or you'll get more of an audible hiss from the noise floor of the amplifier and analog to digital converter. Conversely, loud things will be made quiet. So essentially what you end up losing is the dynamics of the scene. Now, the flip side is you don't have to do anything. And generally speaking, most people would recommend not to use auto when you're recording things. And by and large, that's a good recommendation. However, I would say there are two places where auto is certainly appropriate. One is if you're not trying to do something serious, like you're just getting a clip of your kids at soccer or something like that, in which case having reasonable sound is probably more important than having spending time setting your sound up manually. Something like that, a rushed grab clip from the camera in a news event or something like that is where you might consider using auto instead of trying to go through and do everything the right way. The other place is what I do. Again, 99% of the time, I have no interest in the auto or the audio coming off of the camera other than as a sync track for the actual good quality audio that I'm shooting. So I leave my camera actually in auto pretty much all the time. Because again, in a fairly quiet environment with regular kind of dialogue that doesn't have a tremendous amount of dynamic range, the auto setting will produce an audio track that I can use to automatically sync sound. And even if there's a problem with the automatic syncing, there's usually a good enough quality auto track that I can manually sync the sound if necessary. So those are your sound record settings. Now, if you do have your sound record set to manual, the next setting in this menu will be available to you, which is the record level settings. If you have the sound rec setting set to disable or to auto, this will be grayed out and you will be unable to change the record level. So Canon provides through the interface 64 steps of adjustment, ranging essentially from 0 to 63. In the user interface, 0 is on the far left of the slider and 63 is on the far right of the slider. 0 here is mute. So it's really 63 steps of level adjustment. Now, the reason I made a big deal about disabled not recording an audio track is that when you mute the microphone, the camera does still record an audio track. So regardless of whether you're using the compressed audio or the PCM audio, uncompressed PCM audio, you will end up with an audio file with no sound in it, but the camera will use that added space in your file, on your cards, etc., for the audio that you're not recording because it's muted. Now, to adjust the levels, Canon does make this a little difficult as they don't provide any direct numeric indicator of what your setting is. So if you know, for instance, that with a given microphone in a given like interview type setup, you always want to be at a level of 27, then you're going to have to either count that out or you can use the hash marks that are provided on the slider in the setting. So if you look at the slider, you'll see there's 5 hash marks on it. The hash mark all the way to the far left is 0. The hash mark all the way to the far right is 63. And then the 3 intermediate hash marks going from left to right are equivalent to 16, 32, and 48. So you can use that as a way to, like, if you know you need 27, you can set it to the 32 hash mark and then back it off 5 steps. Another thing to know about the record level menu here is that it does not work like a lot of the settings that Canon has on their camera. Specifically, it doesn't immediately apply the change that you've made as you make the change. So you have to exit out of this menu by hitting Set. You can either tap the virtual button on the LCD or by hitting the physical Set button in the middle of the rear dial to commit that change, save the change, and exit back out of the menu. Now you will hear the gain change and you will see the gain change in the level meter that's displayed in this menu, but you will not be able, when you back out, say by hitting the menu button or half pressing the shutter release to jump back to the shooting live view, the camera will reset to the setting before you came into the menu. Now, of course, one final thing that you might notice if you've used the R5 or really any of Canon's cameras for any length of time while shooting video is that because this isn't a menu, you cannot access it while you are recording. However, Canon has that situation covered as well. So there is a second way to change the record level without going through the sound recording menu. This is through the quick control menu, and it's functionally the exact same interface, but it can always be accessed. So to do this, you need to bring up the quick control menu on the shooting live view screen. So you can do this either by tapping the Q with the box around it virtual button if you have touch buttons enabled on your screen, or with the physical Q with a box around it quick control menu button on the camera's hand grip. So when the quick control menu comes up, you're going to look on the left column of buttons 3 down from the top, where you will see a virtual button that is a little microphone icon followed by a tiny M. And then under that, you will see a very tiny indicator that looks a lot like the level slider that we saw in the record level menu. So this is the record level quick control menu entry. To edit this or change this, you need to select it. You can either do that by tapping the icon on the screen, using the rear dial on the camera, or using the multi-controller's up and down direction to move the cursor to that position. Now, when it's selected, you'll see the camera will draw the same big level meter that you saw in the menu entry, as well as the same fairly big slider that you can use to adjust the levels. Now, there is a whole bunch of ways you can go about adjusting levels in this setting. So you can use either of the 2 top dials on your camera. So the main command dial behind the shutter release, or the dial that surrounds the mode button. You can use left and right on the multi-controller, and you can also use touch. Incidentally, touch also works in the menu settings as well. So with touch, you have 2 different options. You can either touch the left or right arrow buttons on the screen, or you can touch and drag anywhere on the slider to move the arrow to wherever it is you're touching. Now, when you make level changes through this setting or this area as opposed to in the menu, that whole hit set to save settings does not apply anymore. Gain changes are applied immediately when you change the arrow or pointer position in that slider. Jumping back into the sound recording menu, we get to the last entry in that menu page, which takes us to another submenu. So this submenu contains the wind filter and attenuator. Now, I should note, in modern or newer cameras like the R3 and the R6 Mark II, and I believe the R8 as well, and some of the newer crop cameras, this menu doesn't exist. The wind filter and attenuator settings are just additional entries in the menu 1 level up, so the sound recording menu. So we'll start with the wind filter. The wind filter has 2 options that you can select: enabling it or disabling it. Now, this only works with the internal microphone, so if you have an external microphone plugged in, the wind filter will not be available for you to use. As far as what the wind filter does, well, it's honestly not all that impressive. Basically, all it does is apply a low-cut filter with a cutoff frequency of around 200 to 250 hertz to attenuate the bass and sub-bass rumble of wind. It doesn't completely get rid of wind noise. And you can see that here in this demo, where playing wind noise that I created on the camera without the wind filter sounds like this. And then turning the wind filter on, it sounds like this. Now you can still see that in the second example, you can still hear that there's wind noise. However, it's thinner because it has the bass frequencies removed. Now, the other setting that's available in the wind filter attenuator submenu is, of course, the attenuator. 2 options here, again, enable and disable, and enabling the attenuator simply applies 20 decibels of attenuation to the input audio. Now, this is true whether the input is coming from the built-in microphone or from the external microphone jack. Now, Canon recommends turning this on if you're going to be shooting in an environment that has a lot of loud noises, and based on my testing, I might actually add to that recommendation and say anytime you're feeding the camera from an external source, you're better off having the attenuator on the camera and a lot hotter output from your source than you typically will be having a quieter source and not relying or not using and having the attenuator turned off. So from a quality perspective, I think that works out a little better. But again, performance we will talk about in detail in the next video. So the final option for the audio system on the R5 deals with compression, and this is not found in the Shoot 1 sound recording menu, but in fact in the custom functions on the custom function 4 menu page under audio compression. And you have two options here, which Canon just calls, again, enable and disable. When audio compression is enabled, which is the default setting for the camera camera will take the 16-bit 48 kilohertz signal that comes out of the analog to digital converter for the audio system, and it will recompress it, or compress it, I should say, to 256 kilobit AAC compressed audio, again, still at 48 kilohertz. Now, when compression is disabled, you will get the full 16-bit for 48 kilohertz LPCM audio that's coming out of the amplifier, or the analog to digital converter, just being written to your file. So that works out to be, if you're curious, about a 1.5 megabit per second audio stream versus a 256-ish kilobit per second audio stream in compressed mode. Now, first thing I do with my cameras is disable this so that I get the full, the best quality audio, or the uncompressed quality audio. From a practical standpoint, the difference in size doesn't make a whole lot of difference to file sizes, at least in my experience, and it's just a little bit easier to work with having uncompressed audio in post. Although, again, from a performance perspective, the difference between compressed and uncompressed is maybe not going to be that big of a deal. Now, there are a couple of gotchas to have to this setting. First of all, it has to comes to editing movies in the camera. So if you shoot a movie clip in the camera that was shot without compression, so uncompressed LPCM audio, and then you turn compression on, and then you trim that audio or that video clip. So you get rid of maybe a couple of seconds off the beginning, a couple of seconds off the end, whatever. The resulting file that the camera creates will have compression applied. So you're going to go from an uncompressed clip to a clip you've trimmed that is now going to have compressed audio. The inverse is not true. If you take a compressed clip and you run it through the trimming functionality on the camera, you do not get an uncompressed clip out of it if compression was turned off when you edit that video. Finally, there is a couple of circumstances where the camera will completely ignore what you have set here, and this is very specific. So if you are shooting in Scene Intelligent Auto, that's when the mode says A with a little plus next to it, so basically the full auto mode on the camera for exposure control, and you have selected a frame rate of either 25 frames per second if you're shooting in PAL, or 30 frames per second if you're shooting in NTSC, and you have set the camera to use IPB light compression, which is the highest compression that the camera will do. The camera will always compress the audio, even if you have compression disabled here in this setting. Now, I want to reiterate the point that this only happens in Scene Intelligent Auto with those specific frame rates and IPB light compression. Everywhere else in the camera, so manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, program, functional priority, auto exposure, everywhere else where you shoot video, the camera will always use the compression setting you set here, regardless of frame rate or the video compression mode that you choose. Now, before I wrap this up, there is one final point that I want to make. In the manual, Canon does warn that using this audio recording in the camera in conjunction with the Wi-Fi networking can cause noise to show up in your audio recordings. Now, I personally have no experience with this happening, although a lot of that may simply come down to the fact that I don't typically use the Wi-Fi on the camera. But I did want to bring it up because if you do use Wi-Fi while you are recording video and you find an annoying noise, hiss, whine, or something like that in your audio recordings, the first thing that you can do to troubleshoot that is to go turn off the wireless camera or wireless networking capabilities on the camera and see if it goes away with that. So with that said, these are the audio settings on the EOS R5 and how to get data into the camera. In the next video, I'm going to look at a relatively simplistic performance test to see just how much dynamic range the camera has and how well this all works, but that will be a subject for the next time. So I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you're not already. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.